thing is going on here. I wanted to talk briefly about there's a slight difference between Scripture and doctrine. Okay, doctrine is drawn from Scripture. And the most basic way that happens is in catechesis, okay, where Scripture then is now applied, okay, given over. It also happens in preaching, doesn't it? I mean, why do we not just read the Bible when we gather as a congregation? Read the Bible, sit down, and continue on with the service. There's also preaching. So the Word is applied. The same thing with, well, in the Gospel reading. Jesus at the synagogue. The Scripture was read from the scroll, and then preaching goes on. You don't just sit down and leave it at that. Same thing with the Old Testament reading, with Nehemiah and Ezra in Jerusalem. They read the words of the law, and then what does it say there? Yes, verse 8. They read from the book, from the law of God, that's the first thing, clearly, so that all could hear. And then they gave the sense to all the people. They explained what they were hearing and what had been read. So those two really always belong together, the Scriptures and also then catechesis, preaching, larger kind of works on doctrine. Okay? The Creed is another example, something drawn from Scripture, which then is basically an application of Scripture to us. So that's what's going on in this road to Emmaus. Jesus is opening up the Old Testament. It was always there. The book was always there. But now he's opening it up. He's teaching them along the way. He's showing how he fulfills it. Okay? And really, like Paul says, the key component in it all is the death and resurrection of Christ. I mean, if he had not been raised, the book can just sit there as long as it wants. And the preaching would be a waste of breath. But because Christ was crucified and risen from the dead, here he is walking on the road alongside the disciples, bringing them out of confusion into clarity and joy, okay, with his word. So without the death and resurrection of Christ, the Bible can just sit there as long as it wants, and the world is going to end. And we were just wasting our breath in preaching. But because he is risen and he has paid the full price, then the Bible now is our joy and our rock, and we are very glad to announce the good news. So here you have Luke's gospel. They're traveling on the way. They recognize him, and they share that happy news back with others in Jerusalem. Luke's gospel ends uniquely. One last unique thing about Luke's gospel. The ascension, which is also in Matthew. But then verse 52, they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple blessing God. And that reminds you of the beginning of the gospel, doesn't it? The idea of the frame again, beginning and end. The temple, we saw that in the beginning of the gospel with Zechariah there burning incense, and the angel tells him about his son to be born, John. Also the great joy, where have we heard that before? The angels over Bethlehem. I have good news of you, or good news for you of great joy. A great joy for all the people. And so, again, Luke frames it beginning and end. And the second volume is Acts. I need to go and give Bibles, which you as a congregation have provided for the second graders. And they love this gift. And they'll be using it. And I'm going to talk to them a little bit today about just what a treasure they're receiving today. So I think Pastor Brio is going to do something. What? It's about you. Okay. You all look eager, like you're going to hear something worthwhile. I'm still suffering from jet lag. I got back Friday night from India.
I left, I'm not even sure when I left now. It's a long flight back, 10 hours from Hyderabad. Actually, it took us 6 hours to get there by car, driving like this. I told the congregation, we were driving along, all of a sudden, bump, bump. We look back, there's a dead dog back there. And the guy sitting next to us, there's a dead dog. It's just a stray, don't worry about it. They're just animals everywhere. That's India. If any of you saw the movie Blood Diamond, you see that? Brad Pitt? Think he's in it? They always talk about TIA. This is Africa. I invented a new one. TII. This is India. 10 hours flight from Hyderabad to Frankfurt, and then another 10 hours from Frankfurt to Chicago. And then I flew from Chicago to St. Louis to attend a meeting there Friday morning, and then flew back here to Minneapolis. I thank John Radden for taking me to the airport. It took us over an hour to get there. When was that? Well, 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago? Took us 2 hours to get there, and an hour to get back. So I thank him. 3 hours on the road to get me down there. I plan on getting my pictures organized. I'm going to try to do that by next week and kind of take you through a tour of what I did there. I spent the first week teaching in their seminary, myself and another fellow. I taught the book of Jonah, which they were very excited to hear that. They had all their, about 40 men, pastors and seminary students from the what's called the Bible Faith Lutheran Church, which was founded through the auspices of the Wisconsin Synod years ago. The fellow who founded it, who is now dead, he died prematurely, sad case, but his sons and his wife have taken over this church. Very conservative, very interested in establishing some kind of fellowship relationship with the Missouri Synod. So I'm going to work on that back in the States so we can get something going there. But anyway, they were excited to study the book of Jonah. I did that 3 hours every morning, and the other fellow did 3 hours in the afternoon on pictures from Israel, the tabernacle, Jerusalem. It's very fascinating. So then the next week, well, I preached twice. The first week we drove way out to a fishing village somewhere. It was like a 5-hour drive to this church. We had to take a ferry. First of all, they had to back an ox cart on there, and we drove on after it. I thought, oh, whoa. And of course, while the car was leaking oil, the oxen were leaking something else. Everybody's barefoot, you know, walking around in this stuff. Oh, anyway. So then we got over and had to drive through these rough roads. We get this little church way out there somewhere. Boy, were they excited to see it. So that was the first week. Then the next week I preached at another church a little bit closer. People, they don't wear shoes when they're in there. They always take their shoes off, so I had to buy a nice pair of sandals. I got tired of tying my shoes all the time. There were small congregations, but people, they really know their Bibles well. Excited to read the Bible. You mentioned a story like Pastor Johnson did a minute ago about, what was it he just mentioned? Isaiah, I guess, Nazarene. They'd have it just like that. They don't have many other books. That's all they read is the Bible, which may not be so bad, actually. The second week, though, I did we were at a symposium, about 400 or 500 pastors from Andhra Pradesh, which is an area there in India State. Pentecostals, Baptists, Lutherans. They invited any pastors who wanted to come. The topic was basically on the Augsburg Confession. This was the first year they got copies of the Augsburg Confession in their language. This is an incredible thing. These poor Indians do not have any books. They want to be Lutherans, but they don't have books. And they were so excited to get they got the large catechism too, the Augsburg Confession. And I fought for this topic, that if we're going to give them the Augsburg Confession, we should explain to them what it means and why they should use it. So that was my topic. What is the Augsburg Confession? And I learned some interesting things studying that too. Did you know that the Augsburg Confession was not originally intended to be a theological statement, but a political statement? Because you see, since the year 390 AD, the Roman Empire had adopted Nicene Christianity, Nicene Creed, as the religion of the Roman Empire. In 390 AD, the Emperor Theodosius is his name, made an edict that anybody who did not accept the Nicene Creed was not only a heretic, but an enemy of the state. He should be driven out of the Roman Empire, and may God have mercy on his soul. And that's why the Lutherans at the Reformation, well, they weren't called Lutherans yet, the Protestant Catholics, were very concerned to convince the emperor of the Roman Empire at that time, Charles V, that they were not heretics and they were not traitors to the state. Article